All right, now we go on to item 6C, which will be a wage theft research update. And in front of us is Isaiah Sinclair, intern to the mayor. Hit the button. Thank you.
Is it working? Good. Okay. Here's my clicker. All right. It's working. Okay, awesome. Give me just 1 second to get set up. All of you know this, but I'm Isaiah Sinclair. I am Mayor Hurst's intern. I'm here because wage theft is a very important issue to the mayor and hopefully to you guys as well. The city is considering a wage theft ordinance, which would take action to prevent wage theft. So just to get started, I think it makes sense to begin with the basics. The name really does explain a lot of it. It is the stealing of wages from an employee, or specifically not paying them. Sometimes it takes many different forms. Many people are going to look at an employer taking money out of the pocket of an employee and pretty much call that out as wage theft, but it can get more complex. And maybe the most contentious thing about wage theft actually is what counts as wage theft, much more so than whether it's something that needs to be dealt with or what measures are most effective to dealing with it, which is really going to be the bulk of what I'm talking about. So in terms of deciding what counts as wage theft, certain things like late payments might be handled a little bit differently. Some jurisdictions nationally will treat those as essentially unpaid wages and require employers to face penalties for that reason. Others will be much more lenient and say, well, once it's paid, it's paid. Before I get too much deeper in, though, I think it's worth mentioning, if you have any questions about the sorts of things I'm talking about that is pertinent to the slide I'm on, please feel free to ask it. That won't throw me off. It will actually help me explain it in a way that is helpful to you and really gives you all the facts. I'll also be taking questions at the end, so if you have something that doesn't quite align with wherever I'm at, I'll have an opportunity for that as well. So moving on. Why do we care about this, and what does it mean for our community that we're actually passing wage theft? I noticed that one community member commented on Mayor Hurst's declaration that he was going to do something about this, essentially saying, why are we even bothering with this? What is wage theft? Like, can't we focus on real issues? And hopefully this can help answer it. From a criminal justice perspective, it's really the same as any other sort of theft. It's the violation of an agreement, and if we are going to make it illegal to steal items from our store, we should make it illegal to steal hours from our workers. It actually affects them in many ways that is worse than stealing from a store, because not to say that we don't care about business this year, but a business can afford to lose merchandise much more than someone living paycheck to paycheck can afford to miss that paycheck. That actually does ripple effect into a lot of other things that we see in the community, and even actually does hurt businesses, where if you're competing against a business that doesn't pay its employees right, that is able to get away with not paying them overtime hours or is able to exploit them in other ways, that really can create a lot of pressure on your business to either do the same, to cut back on what you're doing, and it creates a bad business environment for the entire community, which we can help address. And that's one of the things that hopefully the nascent ordinance can focus on. And then maybe we can build up to larger things. All right. I think it's also important to talk about what current structures and protections exist. This is really just a very brief summary. On the federal level, the Department of Labor has the Wages and Hour Division, which is, I believe, around 600 federal investigators who look into wage theft cases. But that applies to the entire nation. 330 million Americans, 611 investigators approximately. Those numbers might have changed. Really not a great ratio. And if something were to happen in Linwood, most likely the federal authorities would have very little to do with it. In fact, in recent years, essentially with the new administration, it has been cut back quite a bit. It's an interesting thing. So the penalties that they have issued overall have dropped 90%, and the overall enforcement cases have dropped 97%. Somehow they're actually still up with the amount of money that they've gotten back for workers, so it's not all falling apart. But there is a question about whether they can respond to smaller needs and to the needs of the city of Linwood. Moving down a little bit to the state level, Washington Labor and Industries is the main organization that works with it. But in response to some of the federal action of cutting back on the wage and hour division, the Attorney General, Nick Brown, actually put in place a task force. I'm forgetting what he called it, but the Workers' Rights Unit, that's right. That was about last November. That is really meant to focus in on this and help support it a little bit more. But even still, this is a new program. It's only approaching it from a legal side, as far as I can understand, and they really haven't had any recent news. So the state, they have protections. Wage theft is illegal at this level, and some of those, I can even point it around. Okay, or maybe that's SD. Oh, anyway, and some of those protections. Okay. Some of those state level protections are unique to our state. So, for example, there are some more strict record keeping laws that require businesses to keep track of certain information about what they paid their employees and to post certain information in the workplace, and just to help workers know their rights and to keep that going. So that's something that Washington Labor and Industries works towards. On the municipal level, in Washington, as far as I can tell, there's really only 3 significant attempts at any sort of wage theft regulation in our state. Seattle has been by far the most effective, and I don't think that Spokane or Burien will be too offended by me saying that, considering that Spokane sort of accidentally repealed theirs not too long ago. I spoke with them, and that's the best of my understanding. Essentially, they were rewriting some legal code, and it changed. Their ordinance was not very extensive to begin with. It was really just allowing them to prosecute state-level offenses as, I believe, gross misdemeanors. And that kind of got wiped away with some restructuring. With Burien, their wage theft protections at this point currently only apply to their minimum wage, which is, substantive, and that's a way to uphold their minimum wage, but it's not really going into some of the things that hopefully we can strive for. Seattle, I've had a chance to speak with them quite a bit. They've been very helpful. They've been pretty effective with their city. They have a lot of statistics that are widely available on their website that show that they've been pretty effective. They aren't exactly earning money back for the city, but they're able to do it at a rather inexpensive level, win a lot of money back for workers, and that could be a helpful resource for a city moving into the future. They've expressed willingness to work with us. Similarly, private organizations have also expressed willingness to help us craft this wage theft ordinance, and many of them already offer some sort of guidance. You're going to see me reference some statistics or facts, and I do have the research with me. It's not cited in this presentation here, but it generally comes from organizations like NIWR, NELP. There's a lot of acronyms, but most of them are labor rights groups or think tanks, or some of them are state organizations. Some of it is from studies. Generally speaking, it's from people who are self-interested, but there's very little pushback from people who would even politically oppose them. So, for instance, there are many conservative think tanks that would push back against the broader political agendas, but don't disagree with the facts. So I think that everything here should be relatively non-contentious. And many of them provide resources that are useful. I've kind of broken up the things that Linwood can do into 3 main categories. The first one is protections, as we see here. The second one is investigation, and the third one is enforcement. So protections are essentially the sorts of things that we can enshrine into law that give workers, rights that they can point to in court, or ways that we can structure our administrative toolkit to equip people to know what's going on, to fight back, and to deal with any problems that they have with wage theft. So as you can see here, there's kind of like 5 large things. One thing is misclassification. Many of our existing laws at the federal and state, and potentially municipal, but I'm not entirely sure, at those levels, they can be evaded by essentially just saying, well, he's not an employee, so we don't have to treat him as such. That sort of misclassification when they're doing an employee's work but they count as an independent contractor, is a great way that we can help our workers here. Pay transparency. This is also something that is pretty widely recommended. And I will say, for these next 3 slides, everything you see on it is advocated for by one of the groups that I've mentioned previously. But yeah, pay transparency is something we already have to some degree at the federal and state level, but enforcing it, adding any more to it, considering whether it applies properly to our Linwood workers would be worthwhile. I know that before I came here to work with the city, there was a large profile ENSO project where a lot of the carpenters came into this room and talked about how they had their wages stolen, and they asked you to do something about it. That's an example where them knowing their rights allowed them to really make a difference and say something. But the vast majority of people who experience wage theft don't know what's going on. Many of them are marginalized groups. They don't speak English as their first language, or they're, circumstances for whatever reason, or for instance, they don't have, documents to stay in this country. For whatever reason, they can face pressure from their employer, fear retaliation. So having these sort of structures in place can do a lot. For breaks, making sure that people get their lunch that, the Fair Labor Standards Act requires for them, making sure that they are not being made to work on it, be responsive for it. Those are all important protections. And it goes into some of the non-monetary issues that wage theft that wage theft reaches into. One thing that I'll spotlight a little bit, the Wage Theft Victims Fund. This has been something that the county of San Diego has really pushed forward. In talking with them, they don't actually even have a huge team. San Diego County has a lot of people. And I believe, if I remember correctly, they have between 6 and 7 employees. The 7th one, he kind of counts because he bridges 2 different parts of their government. And with that amount, they're able to put together their victims fund. They're able to enforce 13 ordinances, and they've been pretty effective at education. This fund is about $100,000. If, for instance, a worker were to have $15,000 in wages stolen, they could come to court. If they were to prove it, the court would rule that the employer would have to pay it back. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get the money. So while they're working to figure that out and to earn that money back, they could talk to the fund, say, look, the judge ruled in our favor. They would receive $3,000, and then the county would take over getting the money back for them. That would look like the county placing liens and levies, potentially, seizing property, essentially until they get the $15,000. Then the $12,000 would go to the employee. That would be one, along with the $3,000 they got at the outset, and then $3,000 would stick with them, essentially keeping the fund balanced. In the years that they've been running it, they've never run into a deficit. That would be something that would be reasonable for us to put forward, and it would last for a fairly long time if it was managed properly. And then, payments, I think that one's pretty straightforward. So I'll move on to investigation methods. This is something that may be worth handing over to the police force, and it may be worth creating our own department for, but for either of the solutions, as I understand the city's situation, it would make most sense to do further down the line after we've done some more preliminary work. But this is something that our state is struggling with. And again, I don't think they'll be too offended to hear me say that, because they say that essentially in their own reports, that their investigations are cumbered by the laws that they're dealing with. So some of those common issues that municipalities, states, other investigative agencies run into are all laid out here. The statute of limitations is one that is worth calling out, especially because the victims of wage theft are often poor, often don't have access to an attorney who can fight for them. It takes a while to get around to it, or if they're stuck in a job and they face retaliation, they might not be willing to risk that job until they move on. So having a longer statute of limitations can really mean a lot. Another thing is with Washington Labor and Industries, I believe that they are required to turn a case around from starting it to finishing it within 60 days. and they have a very large backlog. This often means it can be a year or year and a half until someone who submits a wage theft complaint can actually see it even brought to court, let alone settled. So the statute of limitations often runs out for people while the investigative agencies are working on a solution for them, meaning that they can't get their money even if they are found, to be deserving of it. Yeah.
So what is the statute of limitations right now with labor and industries for these?
For labor and industries themselves, they don't have a statute of limitations because they're the enforcement arm, and they're just doing the investigations. They're supposed to be quick with it. They have to get the case done in 60 days. It takes quite a while. I believe for the courts, I'm not going to guess. I'll get back to you on that,
okay,
about what that statute is for Washington State. Another thing that labor and industries talks a lot about is flexible prioritization. Essentially, that they really wish that they'd be able to hand off some of these cases. This is something that San Diego County talked about being very useful for them, where they can say, hey, your case, is not really something that we can help you out with very much. If Linwood is going to launch a program, we have far more residents than we can afford to devote people to handle these cases. And sometimes we would just have to enable our investigators or our resources to say, hey, maybe a private course of action is going to be more effective for you to receive your payment. Or to say, hey, this case is much better handled by the state, the federal government, whatever that might be, rather than tying them up and forcing them to take certain cases. I also want to highlight towards the bottom community intel, listening for third-party tips. This is a big deal because retaliation really does shape the whole game around wage theft. Lots of workers face it. I believe I'll have some figures about this later, but because of that, it's difficult for workers to speak up for themselves. So having an ability to give an anonymous tip, to keep the investigative process anonymous, and to not require an investigator to kind of out the worker as someone who complains, can really do a lot to open up the freedom for these workers to speak up and to get to the end where they actually receive the money, have it not taken away from them through some other retaliatory means. Yeah.
So everything that you're saying, all these investigation methods, these are all current methods that federal and the state and other cities have done or are currently using. This is not what you are recommending that we take on as a city.
So, sort of. I do think that all of these are good practices to put into place, and these are reflected in many different agencies across the nation, rather than it being, this is everything that WLNI does, or this is everything that the federal government does. Some of these things are stronger. With the second one in particular, that's something that Washington Labor and Industries doesn't do, and their internal reports, I don't know if they're internal, but their accountability reports are essentially saying, hey, if we could fix this, we would be so much more effective. So if we're going to put something in, it's, I think, best to learn from the mistakes. It's kind of the idea here.
Got it.
And again, this is something that we would want to put into place, but I don't think it would be, we get the ordinance together, we put it down, and then we have some investigators immediately. That would take some time to develop, probably several years down the line, but certainly something that Linwood ought to look into.
Councilmember Owens.
I just want to say this because it has to do with this specifically. I'd worry about using the police just because of some of the people that it might be involving. That might be an issue, and so you might not get reports just because of that. What I do know is also you might want to look at what they did in Oregon. They actually deputized community people. And so they just went in there not as an enforcement or an arm of LNI, but they would go there and then report to LNI, and LNI would go do their job. So that's a model, too, that we might want to look into.
Yeah, that's great. The concern with police is valid, especially for undocumented workers, where they're just not going to go to the police. That's part of why third-party tips can be so effective. So that's a very good example of it. Some other examples would include speaking with unions, having them kind of have a feeler with their workers and see what's going on, speaking with other community organizations, and really just keeping the communication open and not requiring anyone to out themselves in order to get an investigation going, which does make it a little bit more difficult to investigate, but at the same time, it really opens up people's ability to speak up. All right. And then here's enforcement. This is something that we will scale up as things go on. Larger penalties, treble or quadruple damages, that is something that is probably the most common sort of enforcement mechanism that I've seen, where if you stole $15,000, you've got to pay back $45,000, $60,000, and that really puts a lot of pressure on employers to not only follow the law, but to be careful about doing so and not to be reckless. And it's, as you'll see later, it's actually quite an effective solution on its own. There's a lot of studies behind this. If there's one thing I would really give my thumbs up of approval to, it would be this particular means of enforcement. It's not, a universal fix, and just because it's in place doesn't mean it's going to solve things, but it does work quite well. Then there's also the note on there about an inflation-adjusted penalty matrix. This is just something that generally you have to keep in mind with penalties. $5,000 is, a decent sum today. It's not going to be in 20 years if, history tells us that inflation keeps going up and it doesn't really come down so much. So it would make sense to adjust this to what the actual economy looks like. Bringing charges. Once we put the protections in place, having the proper legal mechanisms necessary to hear these cases, to charge people on them. I think I've mentioned those liens, shareholder payments, and police involvement before. So I just want to focus last on forced arbitration. This is actually also a huge issue. Many companies will require their employees to sign agreements saying if anything goes wrong, you won't go to the government, you won't go to the courts, you'll come here and we'll have our own arbitration system. We'll figure it out with this group here. That prevents a massive group of workers from getting help. Nationally, it really varies. I've seen numbers as high as 98% of workers in an area unable to get any wage theft compensation because of these forced arbitration agreements. In other places, it's lower. I wasn't able to find anything specific to Linwood. So as we launch this program forward, this would be something that would be very important to keep a pulse on and to see if this is really preventing people from getting help. I don't think that just a blanket forced arbitration is illegal will be a great solution, but there are many ways that you can sort of get around it, work with it, and probably the best method for that is really helping workers understand what it means when they get into a forced arbitration agreement, because most of them just end up in one. They sign all the papers to get into their job, and if they even can understand what they're signing, they don't understand the long-term effects of it. Okay, this should be, yes, some of the important facts. So these are federal facts, or I guess I should say nationwide facts, with a few exceptions, like obviously Seattle's Office of Labor Standards. It's not about the whole nation. First one, 18 to 25% of workers experience wage theft yearly. This really is a large portion of the working population. It's a little bit lower in our community, I would imagine, based on the indicators. However, it's still quite a large percent, and the people that it does affect are the most vulnerable in our community. When we see them suffer, that both from a moral perspective of looking to help them, and from a more of a fiscal perspective, it puts a lot of strain on our resources to help people that are being robbed. We want to help these people move on, get better jobs that protect them, that provide them proper wages. So it is a big strain in our community. 69% of workers experience meal break violations. That's an ever stat, to be clear. It's not annual, but that it still is quite a high statistic. 43% report wage theft face that report wage theft face retaliation, and a further 20% don't try because they fear it. This retaliation really is a big problem. Making sure that the working environment is safe will be crucial to having an effective policy here. And making retaliation illegal is something that essentially every wage theft ordinance that's trying to seriously tackle the problem does. A small note on that can be a bit of a difficult subject. How do you define retaliation? And if we don't want to create a situation where a worker can just file a wage theft report so that they can't get fired or have any sort of adverse action. But we also don't want to create a situation where an employer is able to get around the retaliation laws by masking it as something else. So there's that forced arbitration number I was talking about. And then showing that it's a big problem in Washington. With Seattle's OLS, 621 complaints turned into $1.2 million recovered for workers. I think that's pretty good. For WLNI, 6,900 complaints turned into $2.9 million recovered. Those numbers don't quite line up, but that's mostly because Seattle's more focused on some of the bigger ticket items. Yeah.
Of that $1.2 million recovered, when the city gets involved in arbitration, investigation, and all of that, does all of the amount recovered go straight to the individuals, or does a portion of that go back to whoever's funding the investigation, the city? Yeah.
Yeah, the $1.2 million goes back to the workers. They're, depending on how it's structured, and I'm not sure about the specific breakpoints for Seattle, but there's also additional fees that may be going back to the program. I do know that the $1.2 million, even if that all went back to the city, it wouldn't be enough to cover their programs, though.
Cool. Just wondering. Thank you.
The stolen wages in Washington total $128 million yearly. Do you know where they got those assumptions from? Where you pulled that information from?
I don't recall at the moment. I can get that to you, though.
Cool.
So let's see. Washington. Right. So this next is showing how the investigators are definitely overworked. They have a lot going on. They're doing their best with the resources that they have, but it's difficult. This last one is what I was talking about with travel damage laws. It has an R squared of 0.43. Simply, they are found to statistically mean a 43% reduction in violations. So that really is quite effective. We don't have those sorts of numbers for most policies that would be used to address wage theft, but that's something that I can point to and really say that's a great idea. Let me make note of that for you really quick. Just to clarify, you wanted about the $128 million.
Yeah. I didn't see where it was from, how they collected that number of that much in stolen wages. Great.
Yeah, I'll get that to you. Okay. So for Linwood, setting this up, this is more my thing. So this is not like before, based on a lot of the data, and I'm not specifically citing anything here. However, this is based on a vision that I put together after speaking with multiple successful wage theft programs that I think would be better tailored to a smaller city like ours. So the first step is working with labor and industries. This could be challenging if it's framed from the perspective of, hey, like, we need you, LNI, to do more, but I believe that they would be very happy for us to take some things off their plate. And if Linwood were to say, hey, we want to help stop this, we want to deal with it, and we want to offer some of our resources to help our community, then there can be a lot of information sharing, there can be a lot of teamwork. I have attempted to contact them, but I'm still in email prison with that. So I can't speak for them saying that they want to help us, but I would imagine that someone with a little bit more official capacity could get them to help us out. But then step 2 is really where I think our program would start to take shape, to really become sort of a resource hub. speaking with San Diego County in particular, they really did emphasize this, where just by going to businesses and companies and saying, hey, this is what our laws say, do you understand this? Or if they're noticing violations, if they don't have the ability to investigate it, just being able to say, hey, like, nicely, we've got our eye on you, like, you know. And most of the time that ends up with a business saying, oh, wow, like, we didn't know what we were doing. We're gonna fix that. We're gonna make it better. Sometimes those businesses will even kind of cause a ripple effect in that many other businesses will say, hey, we've benefited from talking with this other person that's our business contact and realizing that we need to kind of get our act together, follow the proper structures, be in line with the law. Beginning with this would also create a great framework to give the council data as you, if you were to move forward with this program. So if you say wanted to really put in an investigator to look into wage theft cases in Linwood, then what sort of things would you have them focus on? What sort of qualifications would you want them to have? What sort of ordinances would you want to pass for them to investigate and then have the city enforce? All of those questions would be much better answered if this program began as a resource hub with education and outreach rather than beginning with don't do wage theft and seeing where it goes from there. So that's sort of step 3 of reporting progress. Ideally, they would show this is how we've been effective. This is the greatest need area. So across the nation, some of the most common industries that have issues with wage theft include restaurants, it includes construction, it includes agriculture. So what is that industry in Linwood? Or for those industries that are in Linwood, are they doing better? Are they doing worse? What does it look like? Having the resource hub would really give us some perspective on that. So then moving into council ordinances, whatever sorts of policies would be necessary based on that. Moving into expanding our mission, I think it's all pretty, it snowballs from here. Adopting enforcement to really put some teeth behind the ordinances that are being passed. And then policy innovation. I mean, my hope would be that as really the second Washington city to really go after this, we could start to create a model for what this looks like for cities of our size. Doing so would mean a lot to our community, mean a lot to our workers, and as sort of a commercial center and hub for the county, I think that would also do a lot for that part of our identity. So, yeah, going over some of the major concerns. Budget, I know this is especially important in this season. This would be almost entirely up to how the council wanted to go forward with it. Doesn't necessarily require money. There are some things that could be put in place that would even bring us back some money, depending on how we wanted to structure damages. It's not going to solve. It's not going to solve the budget issues. It's not going to pay for anyone's program, but it can be neutral. It can be benefit. It can swing in a positive direction, and you can choose how much you'd like to pay. And it's a worthwhile expenditure. Another common concern that occurs is unclear laws, and the problem with unclear laws is it leads to both vagueness in enforcement, meaning we don't really quite have as much authority to get things done. It leads to businesses being unsure about how to handle it. It makes more accidents happen. It makes people more. It makes them overly cautious. We just want to be as clear with these as we can, and also to make it clear to the people who are being protected by them. So putting this into the languages that they speak. We have a wonderful limited English proficiency plan in our city. That would be a great resource to follow as we're making it clear to our community, because a lot of the people that speak the many languages of Linwood are the people that are affected by this most. Overburdening businesses is also a real concern. We don't want to create too much red tape. There's already a lot that comes from the federal government and from the state, and if we are not careful, simply putting in more protections doesn't really necessarily mean that workers are better protected. And there's also the size of business consideration. If we are putting these requirements on a large business, it's much easier than a small business for Amazon to have a department that handles payroll records is really not that big of a deal for a mom and pop shop that's trying to sell hot dogs on the street corner to manage payroll because they want to hire like one guy for the summer. Much more difficult. So we want to make sure that that's not an issue. Also, important note: when we overburden businesses and we just make these laws too difficult to follow, people just stop following them, and that kind of defeats the purpose of the laws in the first place. So we also want to make sure we don't overburden the city when we put laws in place. That requires us to put resources towards it. Some of those are time, some of those are money, some of that is the intelligence that we're working with. The thing I want to highlight is actually at the bottom. The one wage theft investigator in Linwood would be better coverage per worker than either the state or the federal, essentially. So one wage theft investigator for federally corresponds to 278,000 people. At the state level, it corresponds to 129,000 people. In Linwood, about 40,000 people if we're limiting it to our residents. And even if we went way higher and said anyone that ever comes into Linwood to work, that went up to as high as 100,000, we're still doing a lot better, and that's still a huge resource for our community. That would make a massive difference. Yeah, and then retaliation. I've talked a lot about this, but this is really, like I said, it's the boogeyman here. We've got to keep an eye out for it. There's some solutions offered here that many governments have tried to put into place. In terms of what is most effective here, I think that 2 and 3, worker anonymity from the start to the end of the investigation, and third-party wage theft reporting are probably the best option, because that really doesn't put a lot of requirements on anyone except for the investigators themselves. The first one is something that you see rather commonly, but it does really make it difficult for businesses to work around it and creates a lot of fear in the wage theft environment.
So are you stating that there is no worker anonymity right now in investigations that are done by the existing state regulators, or what?
As I understand it, no, there's not. Oftentimes, it looks like the investigator receives a report, requires that report to, include your name, include who you are, where you're working, some of those basic things, right? And it's fine that the state has it, of course, because the state isn't their employer, hopefully. It would be quite the thing for WNL&I to be committing wage theft, but that's a different headache. So if they're investigating that, it's not really a problem that they have it with themselves. But then as they go about the investigation, that often looks like asking employees around the business, hey, what's going on? Asking the employer, can I see the records for this employee? And then it goes to the court, and WLNI says, this is the ruling. That creates a very obvious situation where the business owner would really have to try not to know who the employee was, removing anonymity. So, yeah.
Thanks.
And yeah, listing and banning examples of retaliation is actually also pretty effective. But the issue with a list of bans is you can always find other things that aren't on the list, and you have to be very precise about what things are. This is best, I think, as a solution in the education part I was talking about before, explaining with resources, what does retaliation look like. Seattle is a good example of this. You can find on their website lots of information about what retaliation looks like, lots of explanations about what protections are actually offered. All right. So overall, together, those main common challenges really do get easier. As wage theft goes down, these become less of an issue. Businesses don't have to worry so much about the new requirements when they don't have to be as stringent. The city isn't as overburdened when wage theft gets better. So the good news is that the hardest work is going to be in the beginning, and then it really is going to get better from there. But yeah, unless there's a secret slide, nope, that's all.
Okay, Council Vice President.
Thank you, Mayor. First and foremost, congratulations. That was a great presentation, and you just didn't read off the slides. You explained the bullets, which was really good. You made it easily digestible information for something that can be very dry.
Thank you.
I wanted to just answer quickly, President Coelho, you can call in and make a complaint anonymously, but if you want them to do the investigation for you, you have to actually give them your information. I've actually encountered a couple in just the last few years, workers, and just something about the tip, and I asked them, they're like, we don't get to keep them anyways. And I myself have called in and anonymously complained on their behalf about an establishment. They weren't here, they were in Mountain Lake Terrace. But I just wanted to say it does happen, and I've encountered this personally from the tip side, and then we heard about the wage side. And I've mentioned this before, but I don't think it was with this council. My family is a victim of wage theft, and if something like this or a fund would have been in place, it was great. It was here in Linwood once upon a time ago at the old Linwood High School demolition project. And my question to you is, in your research, did you find, because this was a big roadblock and my family never got paid for the wages it was the general contractor, and what he did was they just filed bankruptcy. And so then L&I couldn't collect, and then this guy just went and started up another company the next year under a different name. And so my curiosity and question to you is, during your research, did you encounter or hear about that? And do you think, based on your research, that we could incorporate some kind of policy to kind of combat that? Because obviously we can't say doing business as, because they're not that business anymore, but maybe we can say if person or entity, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I just wanted to pick your brain on if you heard anything about that and what your thoughts are on that specific thing, because that's what happened to my family.
So yes and yes. I've seen things about it, and I think there are things that we can do to address it. Companies get very squirmy-wormy when the government tells them, hey, you have hundreds of thousands of dollars that you've stolen from your employees and you have to pay up now. Across the many solutions, I think there's sort of 2 or 3 main categories for them. So the first category is, can you really get this money out of the people who stole it? So that would include things like liens, by taking property, by issuing fines, and actually having the city of Linwood follow up to get those. When they file for bankruptcy and think they're clever by creating a new LLC, many governments have been able to solve that by either charging the stakeholders of the companies, going after makes it sound so bad, following up on the family of the people who are doing this, launching investigations into where this money's going, requiring them not to pay it back all at once, but over a slower time, where they kind of like a payment plan, or where they finance it, and that is another reason why the victims fund is such an effective thing, because the victims can get paid immediately while the government collects the money slowly, and because the fund can absorb the costs and the families can't, it ends up working out much better. So that's kind of the first category. There's a good chance I forget what the third category is, but the second category is making it easier on the people who are needing that money. So like you said, and I wasn't familiar with this program, the fact that, did you say the demolitions organization or something? The fact that they were able to offer support really meant a lot. So existing support services like our overall social safety net does a lot. A wage theft victims fund would also do a lot for that. Other things like having a resource officer who can connect people who are victims of that with new opportunities, fighting against retaliation, and preventing them from getting unjustly fired after something like this. All of those things can help make it better. And yeah, I've forgotten the third category, but if it comes back to me, I will let you know.
No, that is all really good and great information. And I had to ask because it's like, what would be the point of creating something so amazing when someone can just change their name and go bankrupt and do it again and keep doing that? And so if we can not only put some teeth but prevent that like shenanigan from happening, that would help us, because that is money that goes, if you live here and work here, and it comes back to us. And if not, they could miss their bills. And, it's just a big domino effect when you're not getting paid. Fortunate enough, we were a 2-income family, and I was able to hold us up for that 6 to 8 weeks that he didn't get paid and we never got. But some families don't have that, and all of a sudden they're getting a shut-off notice. They're getting an eviction, And so I like that we're thinking about this and that we can prevent families from that hardship in the future that might not have that second income, or maybe that's all that they have. Thank you for your presentation and response.
Yeah. And can I follow up with that? Because I did think of the third category. Okay. Another way that we can address that is to make it more difficult for businesses to be funny. And the best way that I've seen to do that is to kind of go after licenses. So many businesses will require lots of different licenses to do what they're doing, especially in the industries where wage theft is most prevalent. So a liquor license, if you make that dependent on actually paying your employees properly, that is something that many municipalities have done. And there's really a lot of licenses you can go after there. Or you can take it from a more monetary perspective and kind of make those penalties grow as they fail to pay them. So if the judge rules $15,000 and you mess around for a year and it becomes $20,000, whatever that grows to.
Councilmember Mata.
Thank you for the presentation. I know we're way over the time allotted for this, so I think I just want to say that I love all of these potential solutions. I think that looking into how much it would cost to have one investigator, maybe they're incorporated into human services or into DBS, I'm not sure. I would be interested to look at what the numbers are of that, because that to me seems like the biggest way that we can actually help our community. There's great resources and all of those things, but if we're connecting them with WLNI or the state, all these things, and they are overburdened, then nothing's actually going to change. So if the way that we can actually help is by having someone on staff manage investigations, to me that would really help us in the long run, and understanding the fiscal challenges we currently face. But as a council, our job is prioritization. So if we think this is a priority, then I think it's up to us to figure out where this fits in the budget. I would just want to know how much does that actually cost. Thank you.
Councilmember Owens.
Touching on that, I feel like there's a little bit of overlap if this community workforce agreement ever comes to fruition also. So there's some of that, going back to sharing some of that cost with some of the other surrounding cities if we can all come together. But, pipe dreams. Okay. Yes, they'll send a letter with your name on it to the employer. I've done it. The LNI will send a letter saying Bryce Owings made a complaint about this company, because I've done it. And it took about 9 months for them to actually even reply to the problem, which I was long off the project, so it didn't even matter. And then I never saw the money. I've experienced many times getting wage theft, especially when you're getting paid under the table, because that's usually how these types of contractors try to do it. So no paper trail. There's lots of little scummy things, and especially as a young man, I didn't know what I was doing, right? And so, when you add, English as your second language on top of that, you can be an old man and be even more confused than I was at that time. So that's just touching on that. Prevention, I think, is probably the most cost-effective way of dealing with it. Have you looked into how the county kind of has, I forget how they word it, but they have a list of good contractors, bad contractors, and then once a contractor gets on that bad list, they're not allowed to do, it's harder for them to do work in that area. And so have you kind of looked into that solution?
I haven't looked into that a ton.
Okay.
As I understand it, that list exists more for the contractors that the county itself will operate with, rather than saying, oh, well, you're on our bad list, so we're going to get in your way of doing your own private business. But
Council President.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Isaiah. Or Mayor Junior, is that your title in the office?
That's what he calls me.
Okay. Wonderful research. I just want to start off by getting a little bit of clarification. I feel like some of the comments tonight have had the insinuation that these are great ideas and we need you to go and do more. You're done in a few days, right? You're out of here.
on the 12th.
So I just want council to center on ourselves in this discussion. This is research that was done for our benefit and for us to use for whatever action we feel is appropriate. I personally, I think things like the triple damages is a really low-hanging kind of bit of fruit to work on. I liked the forced arbitration reform idea. I really love the victims fund idea to make sure people are getting funds in a timely fashion. The anonymity issue sounds like it's a pretty tough one to resolve. I think a lot of these ideas warrant more conversation beyond tonight. And so what I'm kind of thinking is this is, to Councilmember Owings' point, this is something that the workforce task group, or whatever we're calling it, should really, take on, and maybe y'all can chew on this a bit, and then come back with some actionable items after y'all have talked with some stakeholders in the community. I also think that these are great ideas, and Linwood is such a small city that it feels like for us to have these outliers on some of these reforms might be a missed opportunity. Perhaps this is something, along with some cost sharing with neighboring municipalities, for getting some kind of investigator or some other staff member for this. This is an opportunity for us to try and regionalize these laws and bring in other cities. And I wonder if any of y'all would be interested in maybe going to other city councils and presenting some of these ideas and with some action items and trying to get some buy-in. Because I feel like Linwood alone is fairly small, but you add in Mount Lake Terrace, you add in Edmonds, you add in Mill Creek, Mukilteo, like that's a good chunk of people. That's 170,000 people, and I think at that point you start to get at something that tangibly impacts South County. And so I'd almost think of this as an opportunity to think bigger, and as like the beginning spark of something. We've got the ammunition, we've got a really great narrative, we've got case examples of situations where this has impacted residents in our area, maybe not Linwood residents, because as you pointed out in the minimum wage presentation that the mayor is going to present later on at some point soon, there's only about, I think, 1,200 residents work in the city of Linwood and live here. And so a lot of what we're talking about here is going to impact people beyond our borders, people who are coming in from outside. And if we can include more stakeholders in this, I think that will just help more collectively of our residents. So those are just my thoughts on it, and I would love to hear from the task group, or I guess in this case, Councilmember Wright, if you have any more thoughts on this.
I have lots of thoughts. So I do think this is something that I always will defer to the chair, though, that we could also take on, because there is a lot of overlap. There's also a lot of overlap within the state agencies. We don't want, if somebody else is doing something, we could piggyback off of that. But L&I is always going to have problems, just like every other city in the state, with budgeting, and that's why things are super late. I think it's something we could look into. I know that there's a database of businesses that have been found violating wage complaints. So we can also look at that. For businesses that close for whatever reason, and then they go open to Secretary of State and get a new UBI and then start all over, they should be looking at who your principals are and who are your owners, and cross-checking that on these databases. Again, with cuts and everything, I don't know if that's actually happening, but that framework does exist. I also know that there is legislation floating around in DC about ending arbitration, that private thing. We don't know how that's going to work, because that goes into a Supreme Court case, and we just don't know how that's going to work. So there's a lot of things I think that we could look at. So you've done an amazing job and a lot of work. And I almost didn't want to say anything because I'm an L&I person, but I'm not a worker rights person. I'm on the other side. But you've done a ton of work, and hopefully we can connect with somebody there that could give us some more information on that. But Chair.
Yeah, very good. I think this was the PowerPoint that was 67 slides when we started, right?
This is indeed the shortened version, yes.
So
And I took out all the citations.
he did a lot of work, I tell you. It was awesome, very awesome. All right, any other comments, questions before we take a much-needed break? All right, let's take a break.